Now, if ever there's a sobering sight, it's the graves of our war dead. Those brave men and women from the South who laid down their lives for our liberty. Not the sort of place you'd expect tales of murder and treachery. Or so you'd think. This is the story of a Nazi spy who disguised himself as a British prisoner of war to get his information. A spy who was hanged for treason, but whose name still appears on a hero's memorial here at Brookwood near Woking. Covering 37 acres, Brookwood Military Cemetery is the largest Commonwealth War cemetery in Britain. More than 1,600 casualties of World War I are buried here. Many came to the UK to be treated for wounds from which they'd never recover. From World War II, nearly 4,000 heroes from Commonwealth countries, as well as a number of US personnel, are buried here. And overlooking their final resting place is this memorial to those with no known grave. Here are the names of 3,500 people who gave their lives for their country. They include those who fell during the campaigns in Norway, commandos killed in the daring Saint-Nazaire raid, and special agents who were murdered as prisoners of war. But alongside the undoubted heroes are the names of 3 men who didn't go missing in action. Men who are hung and buried in mass graves at Pentonville and Wandsworth prisons.
This memorial has been built in honor of 3,500 soldiers of the land forces of the Commonwealth.
When it was opened to great fanfare by the Queen, nobody realised that a handful of criminals were included in the Roll of Honour.
All upheld the proud traditions of their country and the Commonwealth.
So why have we got spies and murderers here then?
Well, it certainly seems incredible, but the fact of the matter was, at the end of the War Office made a conscious decision that anyone who died in military service, howsoever they died, so whether they died through accident, illness, or from active service in combat, would be commemorated. And these people who were executed villains were, at the time of their death, serving personnel, because the army either overlooked or forgot to actually give them a dishonourable discharge. So the day they were executed, they're serving personnel.
So who have we got then?
Well, one of them is here on panel 17, and we've got Theodore Shirk just down here.
Shirk, a serving British soldier, was captured by the Germans at Tobruk in North Africa. He was imprisoned, and it was then that his loyalties changed.
Whilst in the prisoner of war camp, he turned across to the enemy side, and he would go around befriending British officers within the camp and trying to extract information from them.
How was he rumbled? How was he caught?
It was realised at the time by other officers who were in the camp. So at the end of the war, the matter was reported to the authorities, and Shirk was swiftly arrested.
What was his fate?
He was executed. He was actually hanged in a British prison and buried in the prison yard.
So this memorial for heroes with no known grave, we know exactly where he lies.
Absolutely.
Perhaps one of the most disturbing stories is that of gunner Ernest Kemp. On a cold February evening in 1944, RS Miriam Dealey was returning to her RAF base in Kidbrooke in London. Known as Miriam to her friends, she'd been away for the weekend to visit her fiancé. Due to an air raid, she missed her connecting train and found herself walking the final part of her journey from Lewisham Station to her barracks with 3 others. Just outside Kidbrooke Church, only 400 yards from her destination, 2 of her fellow travellers turned for home, leaving Miriam and the remaining stranger to walk on. 2 days later, her body was discovered by allotments here at Well Hall. Miriam had been strangled with her own scarf. Gunner Ernest Kemp, an army deserter, was arrested. He then confessed to her murder. During his trial, compelling evidence led the jury to find Kemp guilty of Miriam's murder. On the 6th of June 1944, here at Wandsworth Prison, Kemp was executed, his body buried within the prison grounds. And it wasn't just British criminals who mistakenly ended up gracing the tablets on Brookwood's War Memorial.
Well, on this panel here, somewhere, we've got Private Auguste Sangre of the Royal Canadian Infantry Corps.
Right.
And Auguste Sangre was a North American Indian who was convicted for what was called the Wigwam murder.
So what happened?
Well, he had a relationship with a young girl called Joan Wolfe, and the circumstances of the murder are a bit vague and obscure, but he murdered her and buried her body on an army training ground not far from here.
Why was it called the Wigwam murder?
Well, he was a North American Indian, and he constructed a wigwam which he and this girl lived in on the edge of this training ground. And they were there for some weeks, apparently. They were occasionally moved on, but this was their home.
And there's a rumour that she was pregnant, and that may have been the motive.
Yeah, it's possible it was the motive. We don't know. Auguste Sangre protested his innocence right to the very end, but unfortunately too much time had elapsed, and at the post-mortem they couldn't tell one way or the other whether she was pregnant or not. And ultimately he was executed as a murderer in a British prison.
And buried in a mass grave?
Absolutely, yes.
While some people are calling for the names to be removed, others say the time has now passed. And although a few names are there in error, the memorial itself remains a moving tribute to some of the most heroic deeds of World War II. Although Iris Miriam Dealey was buried with military honours at her local cemetery, the fact that her killer's name still adorns a national memorial is a source of shame to historian Andy Saunders. So here we are in a memorial for heroes, and yet we have these men who are far from heroes. Should they be on here?
In my view, no, they shouldn't. You know, I think it's probably an insult to the families of the victims and to the families of the guys who are commemorated here who are heroes. So from that point of view, I think the names should be removed. We trace one of Miriam's surviving relatives to Australia. In a letter to us, Christopher Dealey says that he regards it as an abomination that Kemp's name is commemorated alongside those of decent men and women who paid the supreme sacrifice. He goes on to say that as head of the family, he feels entitled, in honour of her precious memory, to request that Ernest Kemp's name be removed from the Brookwood Memorial.